young boy falls in love with the neighbor's daughter, and one evening, to impress her, he dives into a forbidden lake, which changes his entire life. A story which transforms the innermost fear into an outward reality. A novella which draws on storytelling, fairy tale, and poetry, which stir them all to create an unusual parable. Dedlick. He's a novelist and a poet who was forced to flee away from his homeland just because he penned his thoughts according to his conscience. He's a man with huge creativity and vivid imagination. And he is none other than Hamid Ismailov. Welcome to our show, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. So, beginning, first and foremost, we should welcome you to Sri Lanka, since we are celebrating our month of literature, and yeah, since one of your greatest books, The Deadlock, has been translated by our most veteran Chulananda Samaranayaka. So, as Colombo Post, we thought that it's better for us to introduce you to our young readers. And yeah, to be frankly, let's start with your childhood.
Thank you very much. I am too old to remember my childhood now, but my childhood, so I was born in Kyrgyzstan.
Yes.
The country of Aitmatov, who is, as I discovered here, is huge literary authority here. Everyone knows him, his books have been published, and Chulananda Samaranayake, the translator who translated so wonderfully The Dead Lake, he translated many books of Aitmatov as well. So I share the same country with Aitmatov, and he was a great friend, elder friend of mine. I was happy to know him. So my childhood was a very traditional one. I was born in a village, so I'm a village boy, as my wife says to me. So therefore I'm very traditional in my outlook maybe. So I was born and brought up in mostly female community, because the male part, due to Stalinian repressions or due to the World War, were killed.
Okay.
Yeah, the male part was my grandfathers were killed, but the grannies and aunties brought me up. So therefore, they were quite traditional in their outlook, as females are. So, and that is the childhood maybe. So my childhood was quite happy among those women, very beautiful, I must say. They were extremely beautiful women. But the first tragedy which was waiting for me was when I was 12 years old. My mom died when I was 12 years old, and I was left with my granny and with my aunties. And it formed my outlook maybe in a way. Though I was loved from all sides, but nonetheless this loss was very big for me. And therefore, I think in my first prose books, I tried to discover the life of either boys, young boys, or the old people, because the theme of the tragedy of the sort of, of the death as such was very interesting for me. At the point of entrance, when the person is entering this life, there is this loss, which is represented by old people and so on and so forth. So initially I was trying to discover this world of old people versus children. And therefore my childhood, as you are asking, was lasting quite a long, because I was reflecting, re-reflecting this childhood. And for me, for a long time, the world of adults wasn't interesting so much. And I think it's because of this tragedy, because I was too young to understand at that time. I was apparently shocked, but then when I became an adult, I started to re-reflect what has happened to me, apparently. And as many people are saying, like famous Gabriel Garcia Marquez said, you know, I left my Macondo when I was 17 and nothing ever happened to me ever since, you know. The same is with me in a way, you know. I left my house of my granny when I was 17, and in a way, you know, lots of things are left there, which I'm still discovering and rediscovering.
So that basically made you to become the person who you are today, the writer.
In a way, yes. This reflection, I think, was the main impulse to make me the person I am, you know, to think about the things in the past, to think about the bigger past, not just my personal past, but past of my people, of my ancestry, of humanity, the interplay between different people, different places, different geographies and different ideologies.
There's a storyteller in each and every one of us. But still, he has chosen to become a storyteller, to make us feel about the things that we have not seen, that we have not heard. So, sir, what really made you to become a storyteller?
I thought about myself, you know, what made me a storyteller, because I do agree with you, everyone has a story to tell, and I urge many people to become writers, you know. Sometimes my wife laughs at me, why are you sort of rallying people to become writers? Because I feel that many people, they've got wonderful stories to tell. But what makes you, this urge, for example, what makes you to listen to this urge? Sometimes it's your maybe upbringing. My grannies were wonderful storytellers. They would take me under the duvet, you know, under the cover while going to bed, for example, and tell me wonderful, wonderful folk tales or stories or all kind of histories, you know. And I got used to it. I got used to it. Every night I was listening to a new story. And apparently it developed my imagination, it developed my love to the culture, to the literature. First I discovered this urge in writing poetry. So I was writing poetry quite for a long time, till I was maybe 30. Then, as Pushkin said, you know, my age started to make me lean towards the prose, you know. Yes, you start to think in a longer terms, in longer forms and sentences. Here, the main thing for the prose writer and for the prose translator is the discipline. Is the discipline, yes. You have to sort of, you know, give up with many things, with socializing, with different things. For example, my working pattern starts usually with the clock change, you know, but when, after the equinox basically, after the September equinox, when the nights are long, so I'm working the night times, you know. Every day I have to write something. I mean, people asking me, where do you have the sort of, you know, where do you have this inspiration every day? You start to develop it, you know, because it's a discipline to sit down and to write, to sit down. Many things which you are meeting in your life, for example, which you met many years ago, all of a sudden click and they become the part of your story. But the main thing here is the discipline, a working discipline.
Then what about the imagination as well as the experiences that you get through living with people and socializing?
Everything comes into the same thing, you know. It's like a puzzle which you are making out of many pieces. Yes. You listen to, you hear some story from your wife or from your colleague, let's say, it's one part of the puzzle, then you remember something else. Yes. The third thing comes from the book which you are reading, though I'm trying not to read books when I'm writing the books, because as any sort of, you know, person, I'm influenced by books, you know. If I read someone's book, I could be influenced by the tone, especially by the tone. Yes. And I'm afraid of the wrong tone for everything. I'll tell you the story. In 2006, I decided, I was in Moscow, And I decided to write a book about my love to Moscow. Because everyone who lives in different places develops relationship with these places. Yeah. If you live in Colombo, day by day you develop, yes, natural relationship, connections with different stations, with different places.
Even with the environment?
Yes, with the environment. I had this relationship, funny to say, but with the underground. Because my life was passing in the underground rather than on the surface. Yes. Moscow underground is one of the most developed undergrounds. You go to this station to meet your friend. You met your wife on the other station. You read the book, for example, on the third station, and so on and so forth. So lots of stories about connecting you with the underground. And I decided to pay a homage to the Moscow underground. And I came back to London and frantically started to write. I wrote about 50 pages. But all of a sudden I realized that the tone is of my another book, you know, that I wrote in this tone something, you know. The musicality of the thing was familiar to me. And which
There's
made
nothing
me
new.
Nothing new in that, which made me to tear everything apart unless the last part clicked, you know, and I was waiting patiently for the last part to click, which came in a night dream.
Night dream?
In a night dream, the last part. And it clicked, and I found the right tone, the right character, the right sort of, you know, devices to write this novel.
No.
Yeah, yeah. There are different sorts of writers. Some people, they explore the things which they discover.
Yes.
Explore from, you know, book to book, sequels, after sequels, and so on and so forth. I am a different type. I would like to discover every time something new, you know, new storytelling technique, new plot, new sort of setup, new set of characters, and so on and so forth. For me, everything to do with writing is with the creativity, with the first time, you know. And I despise the schools of writing in that sense, you know, because for me, writing is to breaking rules which you are creating yourself, breaking the prejudices which you are creating yourself, you know, in your previous book. It's overcoming yourself in a way, you know, looking at yourself afresh every time.
Writing a story or narrating a story doesn't simply mean that you have a story and you find some words and communicating through your letters. It has something else that we call the essence. So finding the real essence of a book, as you have said before, is the top most difficult thing when it comes to writing. So like, you have written many books, and there are some instances that you have been, or like you have often compared with Salman Rushdie, the author of Midnight Children. Do you have anything to say?
They compared me with many writers, you know. They compared me with Gogol, with Dostoevsky, with Bunin, with Russian writers, with Kadyrov, the Uzbek writer. They compared me with too many writers to be true, you know. For me, what's the main thing in being writer? To get the 100% of yourself.
Very true.
You know what? For example, if I'm wearing, let's say, the clothes which are 2 sizes bigger than me, yeah? Or I'm trying to sort of, you know, to lift 200 kilos which I am not able to lift. It creates lots of pain and nothing natural, yeah. It's better when I am trying to lift what I can lift, you know, when I am exactly in the 100% of myself, rather than in, you know, shoes of Gogol or Dostoevsky or whoever is the sort of, you know, measure of comparison. Therefore, for me, you know, a simple writer could be a wonderful writer if he gets the essence of himself. Rather than tries to be like someone else, you know, to either to sort of, you know, try to imitate someone or try to work under someone's influences and so on and so forth. Therefore, I would rather go with a small writer who wears his own size.
Your work has been translated into many other languages, including Russian, French, German, and etc. For the first time in the history, it has been translated into Sinhala, the native language of Sinhalese people. What are your thoughts?
I'm extremely honored, first of all. I'm extremely honored to be translated in Sinhalese language by the wonderful Chula Samaranayake.
Okay.
He is a wonderful translator, and I do trust him because he has translated lots of books of first-class writers like Aitmatov. He has translated Latin American books and so on and so forth. Therefore, I fully trust. I myself used to translate books from different languages to different languages, from Persian poetry into Russian, Uzbek poetry into Russian, then the poetry of Spain, for example, or English poetry into our languages, French poetry into our languages. Therefore, I know how difficult it is to bring someone else's literature into your literature, because you are then changing the referential points. You know, I always have this metaphor for for the translation. You are taking a part of, let's say, garden somewhere else, let's say the steppe garden, yeah, and you are planting it in a new soil. Yeah, whether it'll sort of flourish or not, it's up to the translator. It's not to the author. Therefore, I do appreciate the work of translators. For me, as a writer, it's just a bonus, you know. As a writer, I am writing for those people in which language I am writing. If I'm writing in Russian, so my first primary audience are Russians, let's say, or Russian-speaking people. If I write in Uzbek, I'm aiming it for Uzbeks. What comes as a translation is always extra bonus for me, you know. I never think about, writing the books for the sake of being translated, or it
happens.
An honor, yeah. If you are translated, it's an honor. But I do understand, and therefore I give the carte blanche to my translators, because it's their plant, you know. It's not my plant. They are trying to, to plant it into their soil, into their language, into their culture. So it's their responsibility rather than mine.
So let's talk about Deadleg, which has been translated into Sinhalese these days. How did you get the plot? From where you got the idea? And how you developed it? As far as I got to know, it is a real story. Is it?
A part of it is a real story. In the very end of the 80s, I was traveling through Kazakhstan.
Yes.
And in one of the stations, a perfectly built boy came to our carriage, selling all these, the milk, sour milk, and so on and so forth. So, and I was amazed when he all of a sudden said that he was 28 years old man. That stayed with me for many years. I didn't know what to do with that because I was shocked by the person. And at the time, I didn't even ask why it became like that, what has happened to him. But much, much more later, when I was, through the research of my wife, was very much in the nomadic way of life, thinking about the nomads, yes, which are part of the Central Asia. She was researching the Kazakh music, and I was listening to Kazakh music, listening to their way of singing. I spent some part of my life in my childhood in Kazakhstan. All of a sudden, all the memories started to come back due to my wife's work. And all of a sudden, I started to think about something which I should, once again, as a sort of, as an homage, to write about Kazakhs and Kazakh way of life. Because their way of storytelling is completely different to sedentary people. They are telling their stories just about the moving like on the horse to the future, never looking back. Yes. And I was thinking to deploy these kind of storytelling techniques. And all of a sudden, this story came up, all of a sudden. And something clicked in me because at the same time I was thinking about the breakup of the Soviet Union. What did it mean for ordinary people, especially, you know, this communist project, which was sort of for 70 years there, yeah?
Even you are a victim of it.
In a way, yeah. Huge project. I'm a sort of product of it at the same time, maybe a victim as well, you know. But I sort of thank, for example, this project for the education which I got, for example, for the health which I got. So there were positive sides and negative sides, so one should find the balance here, what was good and what was bad. But for me, the story was a small person in the bigger world, you know, in this big, huge, humane project. Yeah. So what was the role of a small person? And all of a sudden, as you are saying, the metaphor of this non-growing boy, which is kept as a sort of, you know, object in the museum, came up. You know, what has happened to him, for example? He was exactly frozen in the time, in a way, you know, as a physical object, though he is a human soul, you know. So this sort of, you know, juxtaposition between the, you know, experiment, human soul and body was very interesting for me, you know. And here the nuclear power comes, you know, the metaphor all of a sudden becomes bigger and bigger. It's not just metaphor of nuclear power over the people, but in the family as well. It happens through his character, in his soul as well, you know, this explosion, nuclear explosion. So the metaphor of nuclear explosion, which goes through everything, yeah, this quest to become superhuman, but at the same time, all of a sudden, you know, destroying everything, was the initial thought of this book. And all of a sudden, I started to write very quickly in a Kazakh manner, again, forward, forward, forward.
September is month of literature when it comes to Sri Lanka. And we would really love to know, how do you perceive? What are your thoughts about, like, since I saw that you were like looking at the people and how enthusiastic they are. So like your thoughts are much important because like from a different point of view actually.
I've been today to the book festival and I was amazed. I've been to many book festivals in different countries, in Europe, in Asia. What was surprising for me here, the number of youth. Generally, the number of people coming to the festival was amazing. You know, I've never met so many people coming for the book festival. Even to the biggest ones, you know, I've never met so many people wanting to read the books, you know. Secondly, the number of youth. And then I watched what kind of books they're buying, you know. They were buying all kind of books about Che Guevara, about, you know, Paulo Coelho. They were buying lots of translated books. Especially, I was amazed by the number of translated books in Sri Lanka. I had the same experience, and I told about that to my translator Chula just once in my life, in Estonia. Estonia is a small country, former Soviet country in the Baltics, of 5 million people. But even during the Soviet time, they've translated everything from the world literature into their literature, into their language. I have the feeling, the same feeling here. Whatever book I ask, especially with the Russian literature. Even the sort of, you know, Russians forgot people like Korolenko, let's say, yeah? But Korolenko is translated. They forgot writers like Alexeyev and Nosov, but they are translated into Sinhalese, into Tamil, you know. I'm amazed by the this intent of people, this quest of people to translate and to read the books. It's absolutely overwhelming.
In Wikipedia, our guest for tonight, Mr. Hamid Ismailov, has been positioned as a person who has been forcefully requested to flee from his homeland, which means unrooting a plant from the place that he really belongs to. I know it's bitter. Yet, I hope that it might have been a reason for you to come up with all these amazing stories. And what about the turning points in your life?
I think that you can root out person physically from his own land, from his own country, but it's very difficult to unroot a person spiritually, because you belong to bigger time, to bigger place, to bigger space in a way. So in that sense, you know, I am a part of my culture. They can't root out of me, for example, my grannies, my histories, my stories, my language. So wherever I am, I can and I am able to return to this sort of, you know, spiritual world in a way. So therefore, for my writership, it was even, you know, in a way, it's funny to say, but it was a blessing in a way, you know. And I'll tell you why the blessing. Because usually when you live within your culture, you have to follow lots of sort of rules of the conceptual rules of this culture, you know. You have to write in a certain manner. There is the peer pressure. There is the pressure of the newspapers or the magazines, for example, when they are choosing the one writer above another writer. When you are beyond this system, you are free to write. Yeah. Whatever you want to write, and so on and so forth. In that sense, maybe I am blessed, you know, by this freedom to feel myself in the land of my culture, you know, as the sort of Robinson Crusoe, yes. So, therefore, I'm trying to take it positively rather than negatively. There are people who are sort of concentrating on their pains, on their sort of, you know, painful past and so on and so forth. Luckily, I'm not this kind of person. Maybe there is a part of me being nomadic, you know, going from one pasture to another pasture and trying to find sort of replacement in another places.
As a person and as a writer who has addressed many countries in this world, how do you perceive Sri Lankan literature?
I know Sri Lankan literature mostly by its poetry. Maybe because poetry travels much easier than the prose, because to translate prose you have to be very devoted, and especially in the English-speaking world. There are not too many, maybe, I don't know, translators who are bringing the Sri Lankan literature into the world scene. I know it by my own experience. I lived in the UK for 12 years in order to publish my first book. It's very difficult to publish the translated books in the Western world. Maybe partly because of that, I know much better the poetry which I read on, you know, on the social networks. There are friends of me who are living both in Sri Lanka and in the West who are Sri Lankan poets. Therefore, I know the poetry. But now, the Sri Lankan prose is becoming very interesting. Now, a book was published in England and had wonderful reviews in Guardian, for example. It's about the sort of, you know, civil war in Sri Lanka. So little by little, especially young writers are coming to reflect upon this very bitter experience of living through the wartime, through the conflict time, and to the reconciliation. Therefore, I think the time for the Sri Lankan prose is coming now.
Writing is a skill that you need to practice daily. As a writer who have contributed a number of books, what is your advice, or what are your advice to young aspiring writers?
Unfortunately, as I said, it's very difficult to teach writing, you know, because everyone comes with his own way of writing and so on and so forth. But on the other hand, I always think, for example, in order to produce a doctor, yeah, a surgeon, a person studies 6 years in order to repair the body. Yeah. But writers, they are dealing with the soul of people, and sometimes they don't study at all. Yes, which is a bit sort of suspicious, you know. Maybe there are ways of teaching some ways of, and tools maybe, some tools of the trade maybe. But what I can say from my experience, I mean, try to listen to everything you observe around. There is a wonderful saying of Anna Akhmatova, the great Russian poet. She said once, you know, you don't know from what kind of rubbish the flowers are coming, the poems are coming. Meaning, for example, you know, we put manure in order to get beautiful plants. You know, so therefore there is nothing sort of, you know, bad or low, etc., in this life to despise. Look around yourself, see this sort of soil which gives the flowers of your imagination.
So like, after Dead Lake, what's next, sir?
I wrote several books after the Dead Lake. I wrote them in Uzbek. One of the books is called The Devil's Dance, and it's coming in English in March of the next year. It was published already in Uzbek. It's about our great writer who was killed during the Stalinian purges. He wanted to write a new novel. And he told us about this novel, his friends, not us, but his friends. And he started to write this novel, which should have superseded all he wrote before that. But on the 31st of December 1937, he was arrested. And he was shot dead on the 4th of October 1938. So my novel is about from the 31st of December of 37 till the 4th of October while he is in prison. And while he is in prison, as I said previously, he talks to people, he meets people, and everything goes into this novel of him. So in his thoughts, he is thinking about this novel. So it's, you know, in a way, two novels in one. Buy one, get one free. You know? Yes, so I wrote this novel in his mind, as if he was thinking about this novel. And the last words when he is coming for being shot dead, he is saying, everything is ending, but not the novel. But the novel is ended as well.
Everything is ending, but not the novel and his work. Thank you for coming with us.
Thank you.
Giving a precious time, and we are much delighted to have you here, sir.
Thank you very much, and good luck to your television station.
Thank you.